1. Summary on the basics of SQL. What is SQL? Structured Query Language, SQL, is a specific programming language for querying databases. Most small databases and industrial databases are accessible using SQL statements. SQL is the ANSI and ISO standard. However, many database products that support SQL do so with proprietary standard language extensions. Web applications can use user-supplied inputs to create custom SQL statements for dynamic web requests. What is SQL injection? An SQL injection is a technique that exploits a security vulnerability that occurs in a web application database layer. Weakness is present when the user input is poorly filtered because of literal escape strings embedded in SQL statements, or if the user input is not typed and therefore starts unexpectedly. It is an example of a more general vulnerability class that can occur whenever a programming or scripting language is integrated with another. SQL injection is a subset of uncontrolled or uninfected user input vulnerabilities. Buffer overflows are different subgroups. The idea is to convert the application so as to execute the unscheduled SQL code. If the form naively creates SQL strings when you move and then runs them, then it is easy to create real surprises. Many of a company's web servers are comprised only by SQL injection, including by big names that I would not want to mention here, and you can effortlessly search them on the internet. What is a blind SQL injection? This type of attack is called a blind SQL injection attack because the attacker cannot exploit detailed error messages from the server or other sources of application information. Getting the correct SQL syntax is usually the most complex part of the hidden SQL injection process, and it can take a lot of trial and error. But by adding more status to the SQL statement and access the results of the web application, the attacker will eventually determine if the application is vulnerable to SQL injection. A blind SQL injection is a particular case that affects the security of web developers or website owners. Although I may think that everything on the server is strictly protected, but a blind SQL injection attack will quietly play the truth or the consequences on the web server. This type of attack, despite taking a lot of time, is the major one that provides the most reliable security hole. This is because not only does an attacker receive access, but it also provides him with a considerable amount of knowledge about the database and can potentially access the server's file system. This type of attack is automatic and requires the right amount of configuration in order to succeed. But once you do, it does not take much effort to repeat it. What is an SQL injection error message? Web applications often use SQL queries with client-supplied entries in the where clause to retrieve data from the database. When a web application executes such requests, without checking or analyzing the information provided by the user to ensure that they are not harmful, SQL injection attacks can occur. When sending unexpected data, an attacker can generate and send SQL queries to a web application database. The SQL injection vulnerability test is performed by sending application data that produces an invalid SQL query. If the server returns an error message, then this information can be used to attempt uncontrolled access to the database. This is the footing of one of the most successful SQL injection attacks. Hiding the error messages does not stop the SQL injection attack. What usually happens is that the attacker will use the knowledge gained from the failure of this attack to change tactics. What they are for is a blind injection of SQL. Why SQL injection? When a web application fails to sanitize the user-supplied entry successfully, the attacker can change the construction of the SQL helper statements. When an attacker modifies an SQL statement, the process will run with the same permissions as the component that executed the command. For example, database server, web application server, web server, etc. The effect of this attack may allow attackers to gain complete control of the base. When only port 80 is open, your most reliable vulnerability scanner cannot return anything useful, and you ought to know that the administrator always repairs your server.